You know that feeling after certain conversations, when you walk away tired in a way sleep does not fix. Nothing dramatic may have happened. No one yelled, no one said anything obviously cruel, but somehow you leave feeling less steady than when you arrived. Like your confidence got pulled apart in tiny pieces, and now you are trying to figure out where it went. That is not just being sensitive. That is what toxic people often do quietly. They do not always drain you with one obvious attack. Sometimes they drain you by making you question your own clarity. And the part most people miss is this. Smart people are not protected from toxic people because they are lucky. They are protected because they stop doing certain things around them. That is why toxic people are not always easy to recognize. They do not always look like a clear villain. Sometimes they simply make you doubt your own feelings again and again. Smart people do not deal with this by becoming cold. They learn to protect themselves earlier, more clearly, and with fewer explanations. The first thing they do is trust the emotional aftertaste. Not every uncomfortable feeling means someone is toxic. Sometimes you are tired. Sometimes you are more sensitive than usual. Sometimes a good person just says something clumsily, but if every time you are around someone, you feel tense, edited, careful, or responsible for managing their reaction before you can tell the truth, that feeling deserves attention. It is not a final judgment. It is information. Smart people do not immediately say, "This person is bad." They begin with something quieter. Something happens to me around this person, and I need to pay attention to it. That alone changes the way they move. Because many toxic patterns survive by teaching you to distrust your first signal. The second thing they do is separate a hard moment from a repeated pattern. One argument does not define a person. One defensive reaction does not make someone toxic. Everybody has bad days, but a pattern is different. A pattern is what continues after the apology. It is the behavior that repeats after the conversation where everything seemed understood. It is when someone says they want your honesty, but every time you are honest, you end up comforting them. Smart people do not only look at one moment, they look at repetition. They ask, is this a misunderstanding or is this the shape of the relationship? That question keeps them from overreacting, but it also keeps them from ignoring too much. The third thing they do is watch behavior after the words. Toxic people can be very good with language. They can apologize well. They can explain themselves clearly. They can sound self-aware. They can say the exact thing that makes you soften. But words only matter when behavior changes after them. An apology is not the same as a changed pattern. I understand now only matters if the next choices show that understanding. Smart people do not reject apologies. They simply do not confuse an apology with transformation. They watch. Does this person respect a boundary when it is inconvenient? Do they become more careful with your feelings over time? Or do they say the right thing, then continue doing the same thing? The fourth thing they do is measure impact. Not just intention. This is hard for kind people. Kind people try to understand why someone acts the way they do. They think about the other person's past, their fear, their stress, their wounds. They do not want to call someone toxic if that person did not mean to hurt them. But someone can hurt you without meaning to. A person can be wounded and still make you smaller. A person can love you in the only way they know, and still make you anxious, careful, and afraid to tell the truth. Intention matters, but impact matters too. Smart people stop only asking, did they mean to do that? They start asking, what keeps happening to me when I stay close to them? That question does not turn anyone into a villain. It simply makes your experience part of the truth. The fifth thing they do is set boundaries as decisions about themselves. Many people think a boundary is about forcing someone else to change. But with toxic people, that often becomes another argument. They question your tone. They say you are too sensitive. They make your boundary the new problem. Smart people understand that the strongest boundary begins inside. If the conversation becomes blame, I will end it. If my vulnerability becomes material for an argument, I will stop sharing it. If this message is only trying to pull me into a reaction, I will not answer right away. A boundary is not an attempt to control another person. It is a decision that you will no longer participate in a pattern that harms you. The sixth thing they do is change the level of access. Not everyone needs to be cut off completely. Sometimes the answer is not disappearing. Sometimes the answer is moving someone further away from the center of your emotional life. Some people can have your politeness, but not your vulnerability. Some people can have a short answer, but not a long explanation. Some people can be in the same room, but not inside the most private parts of you. That is not coldness. That is placement. Smart people do not confuse access with love. They understand that closeness has to be earned through consistency, not history, guilt, or someone saying they need you. The question is no longer, should I keep them or cut them off? A better question is, what level of access is healthy for this person? The seventh thing they do is leave the loop without over-explaining. This may be the hardest one, because you want a clean ending. You want them to understand. You want to prove that you were fair, kind, patient, and not the bad person in the story. But with toxic people, the explanation often becomes another door back into the same loop. You explain and they pick apart one sentence. You clarify and they question your tone. You defend yourself and somehow you become the one apologizing for needing distance from the behavior that hurt you. At some point, explaining is no longer honesty. It is a form of self-abandonment. Smart people learn to recognize that point. They do not always make a dramatic exit. They simply become less available to the pattern. They answer more slowly. They share less. They react less. They stop trying to win a conversation with someone who benefits from keeping things confusing. And maybe the other person will say you changed. Maybe you did. Maybe you stopped calling exhaustion love. Maybe you stopped mistaking anxiety for closeness. Maybe you stopped believing that being a good person means staying emotionally open to people who make you feel smaller. Smart people are not smart because they never get pulled into toxic patterns. They are smart because eventually they stop negotiating with a pattern that has already revealed itself. They trust the emotional aftertaste. They watch repetition. They believe behavior more than words. They measure impact, not just intention. They set boundaries from the inside. They adjust access. And when the loop asks for one more explanation, they learn to leave without giving away another piece of their peace. Because dealing with toxic people is not always about winning a conversation. Sometimes it is about no longer letting that conversation decide who you become after it ends.